I must say I'm new to your teachings. I recently bought Ask and It Is Given and just started with the prosperity game back in July. And my income has doubled since then. I do see a lot of power in this information.
Not only will your income double and triple and quadruple, but your ability to visualize increases, which means every part of your life becomes more expansive.
It is exciting. And in this physical experience, I desire to have a healthy body at a normal weight. But I also have desires to eat too much food. So I have...
Well, by your opinion, we don't think you eat more than some people that don't have a weight problem. In other words, do you think that there is a standard by which everyone should eat?
No, I suppose not.
We're surprised any of you can find anything to eat, because there's something wrong with everything that all of you eat from somebody's perspective. And when you are using what they think as your guidance, it's not possible for you to come into any sort of alignment. You see, you've been hearing this all day, but let's apply it specifically to your physical body.
Okay.
So let's say that you're living in your body and you weigh more than you want to and you're not as healthy as you want to be. And out of that, and that's a manifestation that has at the root of it a vibration. In other words, this is a manifestation. It's a creation, but it's a manifestation of a vibration. So as we get to the heart of the vibration, then things can change. But as long as we're just dealing with the peripheral of the physical condition, then you can patch it up, you can go on a diet, you can do some other things, but it's not long lasting. We visited with medical practitioners who concluded and agreed with us as we chewed together about the patients that they are interacting with, that when science and medicine finds a cure for something, that it is only a temporary cure, because at the heart of the disease or illness is a vibration that the cure doesn't deal with. The cure is like a Band-Aid that is temporary. And if you don't get to the vibrational root, then what these doctors see again and again is that they'll treat one illness and it will subside, but the discord or the contradictory vibration squirts out in the form of another illness, which they can treat with some known cure, but then the discord squirts out in the form of another illness. So it's just one thing after another, after another, after another, because what really matters has not come into vibrational alignment. So we see a lot of people who have a manifestation of more body weight than they want, or a body that doesn't feel the way they want it to feel, who will then take some action course. They will alter what they eat, or they will alter the way they move their body, and they will get some temporary results from it, but they will say, I've lost 500 pounds this year, the same 10 pounds, or the same 20 pounds, or the same 50 pounds over and over and over again, because they haven't dealt with the vibration that is at the heart of it. And until you do, you have no long-term alignment. So as you visit with us, it sounds like your issue, the thing that you want to talk about, is your body weight, your physical condition. And so you might say, what should I do? Well, if we were a fitness coach, we might get you on a treadmill. We might weigh you, and we might help you set a goal, and we might monitor what you eat, and we might guide you that you shouldn't eat that, and you shouldn't eat that, and you shouldn't eat that, and you shouldn't eat that. And you might listen, and you might get some results for a while. But because nothing's changed, which caused that to begin with, then you're going to be right back here again, or at another fitness coach, trying to figure out the same thing all over again. So we think that there is an advantage to figuring out what was present in the vibration before the manifestation occurred. In other words, first there is thought, and then there is thought form, and then there is manifestation. And so at the heart of everything that is manifesting is a vibrational attitude or mood, you see. So let's see if we can get deeper than just, I weigh more than I want to weigh. So the way we do that, most comfortably for us and uncomfortably for you, is by saying, what do you think? Can you remember? Can you remember when this started? Can you remember when it started to get out of alignment? Has it always been that way? Can you pinpoint the time in your life when your body weight began to get out of balance?
I was pretty young, probably 11 or 12.
And what's going on around that time? In other words, if you can go back that far, and usually you can, because usually when there is something happening that is in balance, which causes a manifestation which you then live with for many, many years, you're still not very far from that now. So you probably can remember what was happening in your life around that time.
Well, I'm sure that I do some overeating to soothe emotional.
We don't care about that. It doesn't matter about that. In other words, there are people who eat more than you do who don't have this problem. It's not about what you're consuming. It's about the vibrational balance within you. And that's what we want to talk about. We want to talk about, in other words, our friend earlier is asking about unworthiness. Is unworthiness maybe at the heart of something? We want you to see if you can feel where the vibrational discord is that began this imbalance. You see, the body weight, the excessive body weight is just symptomatic of a vibrational imbalance. So you can take action to deal with the excessive body weight, but if you don't deal with the vibrational imbalance, then it just returns and returns and returns and returns. So what is it? What was happening? What was your life like when you were born? How many were in your family?
I'm the youngest of 3 brothers.
And what is the age difference between the brothers?
One 4 years older and one 8 years older.
And what were they up to when you were born? Feeling pretty good? Getting along with each other? Living happily ever after? As best as you can remember.
Yes, I would think there wasn't a lot of conflict.
And when you became old enough that you can remember interacting with them, how was that?
Quite a bit of conflict with my oldest brother.
And what was your relationship with your mother?
She has a tendency to be very needy.
And how did she feel about you?
I can probably I make an assumption that I may not have been well received because it was difficult for them financially.
And
the third child.
As you were interacting with her, what kind of relationship did you have? In other words, because it feels to us, the assumption that you just made is a little different from the assumption that we were making and feeling, in that in her neediness, did she look to you for comfort? In other words, was her dealing with you satisfying to her in any way? If you can't answer it, you don't have to.
I'd say yes.
We think so too. Now, what about your brother that is 8 years older? What was his relationship with your mother at that time?
He probably was in conflict.
And do you think that there was a time when he was the one that she needed?
Yes.
And do you think that it was a relief to him when he was no longer the one that she needed? Or do you think it bothered him?
Yes, I think it bothered him.
And so when you were the one that he needed, do you think...
I should say it bothered him to be needed. He was probably relieved. He was
So
relieved.
he was relieved when he was sort of let off the hook in that way.
He may have been, yes.
So what was your relationship with him? Can you remember? Try to fast forward to the time that you began gaining weight.
I certainly looked up to him, and he was somewhat abusive.
So,
especially around my weight.
So
he called me names.
But even before that, in other words, we're trying to get to the place before that. Can you remember before that? In other words, do you think that he was making fun of your weight even before there was a reason to make fun of your weight? Do you think he was sort of just poking at you because something about poking at you satisfied him in some way?
Yes.
Do you think that he was jealous of you?
I doubt it.
Well, the reason you don't think that is because when someone is abusive to you, it feels that's the only thing that you can feel. But we've noticed that when someone is abusive to someone, that at the root of it often is their own feeling of not enoughness. And their own feeling of not enoughness is often amplified by someone else that seems to be living what they want to be living. In other words, when someone picks at you or makes fun of you, they're usually trying to put some balance into something that they are not feeling. In other words, maybe he wanted more attention than he let on. In other words, at that early age, as you were that little boy, you tend to take things at face value. When someone says, I don't care, you think they don't care, whether they really cared it or not. When someone says something's wrong with you, you think they're probably right, even though they clearly are not right. In other words, you take it at face value. So we think that what happened is that you were born into an environment where there was already some upheaval, and you sort of just got absorbed into the upheaval and believed everything that everybody said, and somewhere in the process lost your sort of sense of who you are. We don't think that it was anything very major. In other words, there was not extreme abuse. In fact, if you were being compared blow by blow, experience by experience with a lot of families, it wouldn't have been so different than a lot of families, and maybe even not as extreme as some families. But it doesn't make any difference. It was upsetting to you. In other words, it was contrast or contradictory to you. So now, can you feel that as we've been probing around here a little bit, because we've sort of been jabbing all over the place, we've been reaching and feeling and poking and prodding, did we ring any bells that did you feel any fluctuation in your vibration as you heard any of it? Did you get any sense of relief in any of that conversation?
Yes, I think a little. There, and certainly, I guess my problem that I have is there are situations where I will eat large quantities of food, and at that moment when I am behaving in that way, it feels joyous.
Well, we understand that, and we don't care about that for this reason. And this is a thing that we're wanting to get your attention about. In the same way that we were talking about these different places on the emotional scale, first of all, someone who feels like this can't connect very well with someone who feels like this. In other words, the vibrations are different. And someone who feels like this has these body conditions, and someone who feels like this has these body conditions. In other words, everything that manifests in your experience is really a reflection of where you hang out consistently or on average on this emotional scale, you see. So when you feel, so from what you've been hearing, as we ask the question, where does frustration, what kind of an experience does frustration yield in terms of manifestation? And someone says headache. In other words, we said your joints might hurt. In other words, not anything very significant, things that can be dealt with rather easily. And then we said, where does someone who feels like a victim, what kind of diseases are matched that? And then we say those diseases like heart attacks and strokes, what's that about? And we say that's about powerful wanting and belief in powerlessness. So there's strong discord within. You've got the energy moving really fast and you're not allowing the energy to flow. And so where does it feel like a physical condition of weighing more than you want to weigh? What emotional set point feels like a vibrational match to that?
A longtime friend once said, I've known you for 10 years and I've never seen you angry. And my immediate thought was, no, I just eat the cake.
So does that then feel like there could be some true despair or feeling of powerlessness that if left to my natural devices, I would just find anger and get over it. But since at an early age, when those feelings were beginning to surface, I was not really allowed to get angry. What happened when you got angry when you were little?
I do think of, I remember being told you shouldn't feel that way.
And
for a number of situations.
Your brother that is 8 years older, who was beating up on you, as he displayed anger, what was your response to that?
He was pretty scary.
And what was your decision about that? I don't want to be like that?
I don't want to be like that.
And did you ever display any anger to him? And were there any negative repercussions as a result of that? Or was it just, I don't want to be like that?
Probably just I don't want to be like that.
That's what it feels like. And so can you see how simple that is? In other words, long time ago though, but so there you were, born into an environment where your family didn't have enough money, your mother was despondent about it, everyone was feeling sort of down and out, adults were anyway, about that. There were things that you wanted that you couldn't have, feelings of being out of control, and it's not so different from what a lot of people felt, but so there you were, were, and your natural instinct, as you were wanting to find your feeling of greater powerfulness, the natural instinct was to move into anger. But someone who preceded you easily moved into anger, and doesn't wonder he was born into the same family, wasn't he?